Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you are. My name is Jolosochit Lucio. Mi nombre es Jolosochit Lucio. Je m'appelle Jolosochit Lucio. On behalf of the EPWG, I welcome you to this webinar that we have been invited to organize by the OECD-RBA working group. We chose this topic considering that it is an important one given the number of traumatic situations occurring every day in the world and affecting communities, as well as the way that they relate to their heritage and its conservation.
So, my name is Laure Maric. I am part of ICOMOS OCD-RBA and I am a member of the ICOMOS Managing Professional Working Group as YOLO. And before we begin, we would like to share with you some basic rules. For the first one, we ask you to share your full real name. You can proceed as indicated on the screen. Then we ask you to mute your microphone, please, so it will be easier to hear every speakers. And you can also switch off your video to lessen the disruption if you prefer. Next slide, please.
We would like to receive your questions and comments, and please feel free to type these into the Zoom chat. And at the end of this webinar, you will have time for addressing your questions and comments. Thank you.
All the questions will be collated by the Common Dignity Right-Based Approach Working Group. And please note that this webinar is recorded and will be available on YouTube after the event. Thank you. Yellow, you are muted.
I'm sorry. We want to let you know, we want to know what you thought about our webinar. Everyone who takes the time to answer all of the questions in our exit poll at the end of this webinar will go into the draw to win a copy of the new book, People-Centered Methodologies for Heritage Conservation. Please fill it. Thank you.
So let's now present the agenda. We will first present the introduction that we already begin. Then there will be news on trauma and heritage sent by ICOMOS member and member of the All Common Dignity Right-Based Approach Working Group. The third point will be short intervention of Abdoulaye Cissé, Virginia Rush, and Alan Nabil Hamden. You can see the title on the screen, and they will present their own title when they will present their intervention. The fourth will be moderated by Rina Latalou and will propose presentation of Rohit Jatsu Amra, I'm sorry for the misspelling, Adzimua Mevdovic and Samir Abdulilak. And then we will end the webinar with the Q&A session and a closing remarks.
We want to introduce to you our Thursday series coordinators. It is Alicia Castillo, Adriana Careaga, and Ave Paulus.
Here is the team of emerging professionals who worked on this webinar. There is Jolosochit Lucio and Suela Koch, focal points of the EPWG, and Nader Al-Nouri and myself, multilingual communication coordinators.
In the intervention parts, we want to introduce our presenters. It will be Abdoulaye Cissé, Virginia Rush, and Alan Nabil Hamden.
For the roundtable, we will have three presenters as well: Rohit Jatsu, Amra Adzimua Mevdovic, and Samir Abdulilak. And then for the roundtable moderator, we will have Rina Latalou.
And now I want to share some quotes we took from the United Nations Human Rights Office of the Human Commissioner on Human Rights Monitoring that we thought that are really relevant for our webinar. Trauma can have a profound impact on how survivors think, see the world, and relate their experiences. The intensity and nature of their traumatic reactions vary from person to person, depending on their character, the nature of the traumatic event, and the support they receive in the aftermath. Traumatic events are processed differently from non-threatening events. Memory of trauma can therefore be different from memory of non-traumatic events. Like other reactions, the quality of traumatic memory varies from survivor to survivor. In some cases, traumatic memories lack the coherence and detail that other memories may have. In the immediate aftermath of traumatic events, survivors are likely to experience a range of reactions, including emotional, physical, behavioral, and cognitive. While many survivors show resistance and resilience in the face of traumatic events, others may develop long-term problems. Many factors influence to what extent a person will recover naturally. It is without professional help for traumatic event, including personal factors such as factors related to the trauma itself, such as the sensitivity of the event and post-event factors. Oh, thank you. And post-event factors related to the degree of available support. Thank you.
We will now present the news, so I let the floor to Rin for the first one.
Yeah, dear participants, and thank you for choosing such a relevant theme for a webinar, and thank you emerging professionals for taking the lead. The first news, unfortunately, is the terrible situation that we are facing now in Afghanistan, and our colleagues in ICOM have already made a statement to protect Afghan cultural workers and safeguard heritage. And ICOMOS is going to make a statement soon after. But what I really wanted to stress more about is that we are living in a terrible times when one trauma shadows the other one. And in recent years, we have faced several traumatic events that affect cultural heritage and heritage communities, which is a big concern for ICOMOS. Just to mention only Israel-Palestine conflict, Lithuania-Belarus conflict, Russian aggression in Ukraine and Georgia, the conflicts in Tigray, in Ethiopia, in Myanmar, and unfortunately, this is not a full list that I have to express here. And it is really a tragedy that these conflicts come one after another. And Afghanistan is in that sense a very dramatic one, because we have a recent memory from 20 years ago when the great Buddha statues in Bamyan Valley were destroyed. And I just quote a phrase from Francesco Banderin, who said that the destruction of Bamyan Buddhas has been viewed across the world as a prime example of barbarism against cultural heritage. And unfortunately, I'm probably not the only university professor who uses Bamyan as a slide in the presentations talking about about the threats to cultural heritage. And what I think what ICOMOS role is important for is that we are a global organization, and we have this broader look. Sometimes people may think that we are not as quick to act, but at the same time, what ICOMOS is doing is to work much more silently on the sites and to collect the reliable data because the situations are very different. We have to protect the rights of different counterparts. And I guess in that sense, our working group, our Common Dignity Rights-Based Working Group is one of the most relevant ones, because our mission is to identify all the communities and people that are vulnerable in this conflict. If you put this next slide, I will just want to say a couple of words of the recent activity that we carried out. Just 2 weeks ago, we had an global summer school, and we can put the next slide, please, which united students from 15 different universities around the world. And the workshop was about heritage alert and advocacy, because ICOMOS is working very much on different ways how to signal about the traumas and danger to heritage. And the main idea of this summer school was to teach the students how to find verifiable information on the tragedies that take part, to be critical in the resources, and I think this is also the case with all the next presentations and the traumatic situations in the world, that we have to have a critical view, because having a critical view is the best way how we can help the sites in conflicts. Thank you.
I will now continue with the news received by the Common Dignity Right-Based Approach Working Group news. So for the first one, it's about a news sent from Mexico. On 16 August 2019, a feminist march took place in Mexico City. The demonstrator painted on the base of the Independence column in protest against feminicides and gender violence. To leave a graphic testimony of this social protest, the authorities, as well as a feminist group, agreed to leave the graffiti on the monument, as we can see here on the picture. The second news is about human rights and COVID-19. In March 2020, the Common Dignity Working Group expressed concern for the health of vulnerable communities and people at the early stage of the pandemic. The working group raised awareness about the immediate and long-term impact of this pandemic on the livelihood of cultural heritage communities and people earning their living from activities and enterprises linked to cultural heritage. In June 2020, the OCD-RBA working group coordinated the ICOMOS response to a call by the special rapporteur in the field of cultural rights. And finally, in December 2020, the ADCOM included a review by several ICOMOS international scientific committees, working groups, and national committees, and a report was written on the impact of COVID-19 on heritage. The next news comes from Spain. This is a case of the collective memory and legacy of the civil war and the dictatorial period of the 20th century, a memory very conflicted and politicized in recent decades. Spain's government has approved draft legislation, the proposed law on democratic memory, to outlaw expression of support for the former dictator Francisco Franco and demean the dignity of the victim of the 1946 coup or of the civil war, honoring those who suffered persecution or violence. 14 years after Spain passed its historic memory law, the new legislation drafted by the left-wing government aims to eliminate loophole and cover a wide range of victims and crimes related to Francoism. It will also promote the search and examination of victims buried in mass graves. On a similar topic, the Atrium Cultural Route of the Council of Europe underwent a recertification process in July 2021 that should receive a response in 2022. This association works on the actual legacy of totalitarian, authoritarian, and non-democratic regime of the 20th century in the urban and memory of Europe to promote human rights and democracy. Atrium works with the principle of the Faro Convention with local communities in Italy, Croatia, Romania, Bulgaria, and Albania on the distant legacy of the fascist and communist period. This news is from Belgium and Germany. In July, heavy floods hit Germany and Belgium, causing numerous victims, massive evacuation, and damage to cultural heritage. In Belgium, more than 65 heritage sites were affected, including listed sites, museums, and archives, and local communities were evacuated to safer locations. This news is from New Zealand. Yes, in 2011, in Christchurch in New Zealand, earthquake destroyed much of the city. The Christchurch City Council salvaged the items from about 30 heritage buildings and stored them for more than a decade in the hope it could find them a new home. The council heritage team negotiated with demolition contractors, building owners, and the government to get the items. Today, 10 years after the 2011 earthquakes, the council had already been approached by 5 or 6 companies that may be interested in claiming back a piece of their former building. This news is from Haiti. On 14 August 2021, Haiti was hit by a massive earthquake, causing hospitals, schools, and homes to collapse, claiming hundreds of lives and leaving communities in crisis. According to the latest reports issued by the Haitian Civil Protection on 21st of August, the death toll has now surpassed 2,200 with more than 12,200 people injured. Almost 53,000 homes have been destroyed and more than 77,000 have been sustained damage. About 800,000 people have been affected and an estimated 650,000 people are in need of emergency humanitarian assistance. This news is from Australia. When it comes to people-centered and right-based approach, here is a story from Australia, when traditional owners in Western Australia are protesting against new draft heritage legislation, which they argue does not provide them with enough protections. This action comes as a result of the destruction of the significant 46,000 years old Juukan rock shelter site by mining company Rio Tinto in 2020. This summer in Southern Europe, in Greece and in Turkey, forest fires have engulfed a stretch of the region and forced mass evacuation in villages as fire nearest areas like ancient Olympia. The raging fires have led to the abandonment of seaside tourist destinations throughout the region, while the flames have forced residents to leave villages just on the Greek island and mainland, destroyed stretches of forest and home in Turkey. In ancient Olympia, the birthplace of the Olympic Games, local authorities and the army dug fire lines around the archaeological site to keep the flames at bay. We note there are also a lot of other forest fires all around the world, and we are really with all the communities for this damages. Okay, next slide, please. I will let now the floor to you.
Thank you, Laura. Well, now for the interventions part, I would like to introduce our speakers. It will be Abdullah Aziz. He is a UNESCO technical consultant. He's been a UNESCO technical consultant. For example, in 2020, he participated in the mission of architectural diagnosis and preparation for the restoration works of the Mosque of Djingareh Ber It's the Jehia and Sankore, the house of the explorer Henry Barth of Timbuktu. In 2017, he participated in a study and monitoring of the work of phase 2 of the rehabilitation program of World Heritage Properties in Northern Mali, Timbuktu. He is also a collaborating architect in Cratera. We will also have here Virginia Roche. She is an Argentinian conservation architect and lecturer currently pursuing her doctorate in Berlin, Germany. Currently involved in several scientific projects within heritage conservation and active member of ICOMOS Argentina. She is part of the EPWG initiative, ICOMOS COVID-19 Task Force, and the Scientific Committee for the 20th Century Heritage, and her main interests are heritage studies, cultural policies, and architectural heritage. And finally, we will have here Ala Nabil Hamdoun. He has expertise in remote sensing, GIS, disaster management of cultural heritage, and urban seismic activity analysis, urban planning, structural geology, geomorphology, satellite images, and aerial photographs, interpretations, and drone imaging. Thank you for being here, and I will leave the floor to Abdulaziz. Oh, I'm wondering if Abdullah can hear me. Abdullah? I can see his microphone. Maybe there is a technical issue there. Should we continue with? I think we received some materials from Virginia. I can see either Ala here. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Abdullah is having a problem with his internet connection. So what I suggest is maybe I can try to share, I can try to share Virginia's audio. Oh, wait a minute, he's joining back. Hi, Abdullah, can you hear us?
Hi, Yorko. Maybe it's better to start with the following speaker and try to come back to connect with Abdullah after that, if you agree.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. For Virginia, I guess she sent an audio this morning. I don't know how to share that. Virginia, she apologized for not being here. She had a personal, very important issue to attend today. So,
Yola, I can share if you want.
Okay. Thank you very much, Suhaila.
Okay, just a second. Sorry, not this one. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes.
Just
Thank you.
clear.
Hello, dear all, many thanks for the invitation to participate in this much-needed enterprise. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you today, and I don't have the file on hand, so I will leave a couple of reflections that can contribute to the panel discussion afterwards. My name is Virginia Rush, and I wanted to talk about the role of heritage communities during and post-trauma. ICOMOS has been working on reconstruction and post-trauma from different approaches, producing important endeavors and advances, such as the OCD-RBA group and the Landa statement that posits heritage as a cornerstone of human, social, and economic recovery. I wanted to reflect on the post-trauma and reconstruction processes from the point of view of communities. I believe that the involvement of communities in intervention decisions have to have honest regard to professional ethics, to the motivation of heritage communities, and what are these motivations, if they are driven by ownership, managerial, or institutional issues. I wanted to, as an example, the ICOMOS COVID task force report on the impact of the pandemic on heritage included a section on heritage communities as an unintended outcome of the survey. We did the survey and we didn't have that into account, but as an unintended outcome, we included a chapter on that. And we were able to identify the concerns of 6 heritage communities overall, according to their representativity and level of involvement. Local, better practitioners, custodians, users, and experts, on a permanent or casual basis, in person or digitally. This in turn allowed us for a deeper understanding of the impact and a more equitable approach when drafting the recommendations. So what I wanted to ask you, and the questions that I wanted to ask you for contributing to the panels were, what communities can you identify in heritage processes of reconstruction? What are their role and their level of engagement? What are the policies that allow this to happen? And how can we develop tools as heritage practitioners that encourage an equitable, satisfactory, and peaceful existence? I hope these questions contribute to a fruitful debate. And many thanks for your attention. Bye.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I can see Ella here, but I don't know if maybe since we received his slides, maybe we can share them if you all agree on that.
Or if Abdullah is suitable, we can start with him and then we can wait for a few minutes for Allah as well.
Yeah. Abdullah, I see you there with microphone muted.
Okay, so you're suggesting we continue with the next.
Yeah, if we can get connection.
Okay.
Hello.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Hello, we can hear you. Good morning, Abdullah.
Good morning, everyone. I want to speak in French. If you want. My presentation is in English, but I can speak in French.
I think there is an echo because you are using your phone and the computer at the same time. So we heard a bit of noise. It's better now. Can you speak, please?
Sorry. I partage my écran. Je suis en train de voir partager mon écran.
Ok. C'est juste qu'il y a un écho avec, comme votre téléphone est à côté de votre ordinateur, il y a un écho en fait quand vous parlez.
Oui. Au fait, l'écran, l'ordinateur a un souci, j'arrive pas à voir le... Avec la caméra, je ne peux pas les utiliser, donc du coup, j'ai utilisé les deux au fait.
Ok.
Est-ce que ça va maintenant ou...
Le son est bon. Maintenant, il faudrait partager votre écran pour qu'on puisse tous voir votre écran.
Ouais. C'est bon?
Oui.
Ok. Donc, bonjour à tous. C'est Abdoulaye Sissé. Je voudrais vous parler un peu de la destruction des mausolées de Tombouctou lors de la crise de 2012. L'impact que ça a eu sur la communauté et l'importance des mausolées aux yeux des populations. En fait, Tombouctou est une ville historique du Mali, située au nord à quelques 840 km de la capitale. La ville a connu plein de succès au XIVe siècle avec la construction de grandes mosquées et de l'université de Sankore, ce qui a amené une certaine attirance des chercheurs de la religion musulmane. Il y a eu beaucoup d'attirance des chercheurs, des savants africains qui sont convergés vers la ville pour parfaire leur savoir et tout. Donc, à la suite de ils ont été constitués comme des saints à travers leurs réalisations, leur savoir-faire et tout. Donc, ils avaient une certaine importance aux yeux des populations. Donc, c'était des imams aussi, des grandes personnes. Donc, ce qui a fait qu'après leur mort, on a construit des bâtiments autour d'eux. Et la communauté musulmane croit à ces pratiques-là. Quand ils ont des problèmes, quand ils veulent se confier à Dieu, ils pensent que passer par ces personnes appelées saintes, ce qui les rapprocherait de Dieu. Donc, ce qui a fait que les mausolées ont été, d'où l'idée de la construction des mausolées. Donc, depuis le XIVe siècle, ils ont existé. Donc, des centaines et des centaines d'années, les communautés sont en train de vénérer ces tombes-là. Et jusqu'à la fin, maintenant, du coup, jusqu'en 2012, on a vu la destruction de ces mausolées. En tout, Tombouctou compte 333 saints. Bon, il y a plus, il y a même plus, mais ce qui est connu, c'est la ville de 333 saints et qui a été développée depuis la nuit des temps. Mais 16 mausolées ont été inscrits sur la liste du patrimoine mondial sur la base des critères, bien évidemment, dont la valeur universelle exceptionnelle de ces biens. Et c'est lors de 2012, il y a eu une crise de terrorisme, le groupe islamique au Maghreb, c'est-à-dire le groupe Al-Qaïda au Maghreb. Donc, ils ont occupé la région nord du Mali et ils étaient contre ces pratiques et ils ont démoli pratiquement la quasi-totalité de ces mausolées et apporté beaucoup de traumatisme à la population parce qu'il y a beaucoup de populations qui sont descendantes de ces saints et ils se voyaient détruits parce que leur histoire a été détruite. Et du coup, le traumatisme était important. Et il y a eu plein de terreur, il y a eu beaucoup de morts, il y a eu des déplacés et tout. Et c'est grâce à l'intervention des Français en 2013, et ils ont été chassés en collaboration avec l'armée tchadienne et malienne. Et par la suite, il y a eu des appels à fonds, des programmes initiés par l'UNESCO et le gouvernement du Mali en vue de la reconstruction de ces mausolées et la reconstitution des faits et les dédommagements des victimes. Donc, ça, c'est un peu en image l'impact de la crise. La crise a eu d'impact social, économique, environnementales et culturelles. Donc, depuis ce temps, il y a eu ce traumatisme, mais grâce à l'initiative de la Cour pénale internationale, qui a eu des arrêts, des condamnations et tout, et après, il y a eu des dédommagements des victimes. Donc, il y a eu un fonds de 2 millions d'euros, donc, qui a été versé en vue de dédommagement des victimes. Et grâce à ces actions, maintenant, la communauté commence à retrouver un peu, à se rétablir petit à petit et à recevoir le pardon. C'est vrai que la partie qui a été détruite Tombouctou pour des activités de réhabilitation du patrimoine, de conservation et tout, en tant que consultant auprès de l'UNESCO. Et voilà ce que je voudrais vous dire. Si quelqu'un peut le traduire, c'est mieux. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Abdullah. Thank you very much to Abdullah for his interesting presentation. Now, maybe we can, since we don't have here Ala, maybe we can share his presentation. Oh, sorry, I couldn't see her. Oh, yeah. So then I will ask Ala to take the floor and share his presentation. Thank you, Ala, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Everyone can see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So my presentation is about Yazidi heritage and spatial information and remote sensing and GIS. Yazidi heritage has been under huge threat during control of ISIS from 2014 until 2017. So Yazidi are ethno-religious group. Yazidi are ethno-religious group whose religion originated by a syncretism between Zoroastrian related beliefs and variant of Sufism in the 12th century. This group, they live in Iraq, north of Iraq, especially mainly in Nineveh governorate. This group, they have been under attack of ISIS from 2014 till 2017, and they suffered so much from the control of ISIS. And I guess most of you know about that. And their heritage under huge risk to be vanished and destroyed, because they destroyed a lot of mausoleums and temples and religious sites. So we decided to document the Yazidi heritage using modern technique, spatial information, such as remote sensing data and GIS techniques. So with Liverpool University, we started this project last year. Actually, it started this year because COVID-19 circumstance. So we started to document the heritage of Yazidi and try to give them spatial information and try to build a database for Yazidi heritage and in Nineveh Governorate and northern of Iraq, and some of them in Kurdistan region as well. We started with the shrines and temples. We tried to locate these shrines and temple and try to create interactive map and database for these shrines, and then we moved to some community related assets and artifacts, and then try to give them spatial information and database for each one. We will try to protect this heritage as much as we can possible by using these techniques, because they lost a lot of temples during control of ISIS. They destroyed a lot of temples of their religious sites. Sorry. So, sorry. Remote sensing offer an effective way to investigate the landscape context of Yazidi shrine, and giving it is multi-temporal character to document the ongoing condition and threat to Yazidi heritage, especially in areas where political tension and ongoing conflict, because this heritage is still under huge risk, still under huge threat to be destroyed or to be controlled by another group, because a lot of family left their houses and their area to another safe area in northern Iraq or another countries. So we try to protect this heritage by documentation, digital documentation, so that will be safe for the next generation of Yazidi group. That will give us better understanding of landscape context is important when we appreciate that many Yazidi shrines have been frequently reconstructed and are largely recent structures, and what matters to Yazidi might often be the significance of the places. Pilot projects, this is what we'll do next, establish a database by GIS for Yazidi temple or mausoleums in Sinjar and Sheikhan and Bashika. We will choose 3 main areas that has a bigger community of Yazidi, which is Sinjar, Sheikhan, and Bashika, and prepare site location map for the Yazidi heritage in Nineveh heritage, determine the destructed monument of Yazidi heritage in Nineveh region, so that we will have information about the destructed monuments for the next generation and what ICE has done for in this area. A trained community-based participant to prepare them to be a professional researcher or activist in monitoring and protecting Yazidi heritage. This is map, this map is in Arabic, but this map showing in the red area where is Yazidi heritage concentrate. They are in Sinjar area in the west of the Nineveh region, and in the northeast in Sheikhan area and Bashika area, also in Nineveh region. This is information about the temples of Yazidi heritage, but there is no special information as a database or as a package or as interactive map. That's what we'll do. We'll try to create interactive map for all this heritage, so anyone can enter that interactive map and know any information they need about Yazidi heritage. Also, this is another maps, but not interactive map. We'll try to create interactive maps similar to this one with all information needed for Yazidi heritage for the next generation. This is the first step. We locate the shrines in Bashika area and try to check them by field work to see which one being destructed and which one still, and which one under risk to be destructed, or the situation and the state of the shrines. So this is the first step. We started in Bashika, and then we'll move to Sinjar area, and then we'll move Sheikhan area, and then we'll end up by interactive map and a good database for Yazidi heritage in that area. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ala. Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. So I would like now to move on to our roundtable speakers. If you could please share the next slide. Oh. Suhaila, could you please share the speakers slide? I will start presenting our roundtable speakers, and first we have Rohit Hihyatsu. He is a conservation architect and risk management professional from India, currently working at ICROM as project manager of urban heritage, climate change, and disaster risk management. Rohit served as UNESCO chairholder professor at the Institute for Disaster Mitigation of Urban Cultural Heritage at Ritsumeikan University, Kyoto, Japan, where he was instrumental in developing and teaching international training course on disaster risk management of cultural heritage. He was the elected president of ICOMOS India from 2013 and to 2018, and president of ICOMOS International Scientific Committee on Risk Preparedness (ICORP) from 2010 to 2019. Here I will proceed with all of the presentation, then I will open the floor to each one of them. Here we also have Amra Hatsimuhamedovich. She is director of the Center for Cultural Heritage International from Bosnia and the ARC World Heritage Advisor for the editing activities of the conference on integrated reconstruction and post-trauma impact on communities and socio-economic aspects of recovery. She has provided consultancies for UNESCO, World Bank, ICOMOS, ICROM, OSCE, Alta-1, CHWB, etc. At the position of Commissioner to Preserve National Monuments, she was responsible for integration of cultural heritage into post-war recovery of Bosnia, 2001 to 2016. Oh, I'm sorry, very sorry for the noise here. And finally, we have Samir Abdullah. He is chairman of the ICOMOS working group on the safeguarding of cultural heritage in Syria and Iraq, vice president of ICOMOS Committee and Historic Towns, Cities and Villages, board member of ICOMOS France and Blue Shield France, and has recently served as Secretary General of ICOMOS France. He was the founder of a French regional Conseil d'Architecture, d'Urbanisme et de l'Environnement. He has a long international professional experience in the revitalization of historic centers in Arab countries. He participated in projects with UNESCO, UNDP, Harvard University, the World Bank of local governments. He holds a PhD in urban planning, graduated as an architect both in Paris and London. So I will leave the floor. I'm very sorry. Now I will present our moderator for this roundtable session. It will be Rin Alatalu. She is an associate professor at Estonian Academy of Arts Department of Cultural Heritage and Conservation and vice president of ICOMOS for Europe. She is a former president of ICOMOS Estonia and member of the OCD-RBA Working Group, ICLAFI, and CHBBIH. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you especially to Rin for moderating this part.
Thank you. And before giving word to Rohit, I would like to really thank our previous speakers for the interventions, because I think they laid a very good ground for the presentation to come. And Each of our three speakers have 10 minutes, and I guess that we can have the discussions after we have listened to all of them. And I really encourage you to put up the questions already in the chat to make it more simple, the moderation. But please, Rohit, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Reen. Thank you very much for inviting me for this roundtable. I would share some slides, but I think I'll try to highlight a few issues that may be good for discussion. And I'll take the example from Nepal because I feel like our work following the earthquake in 2015 can be an essential, the experiences can be very useful for finding out how heritage and trauma need to be considered in different cultural contexts. So I'll just share the screen now. Just a moment. There we are. So the earthquake in Nepal was quite devastating for heritage. A lot of heritage fragments were damaged. In a very many World Heritage properties got damaged, temples, museums, as you would see here, and very importantly, traditional settlements, the cultural practices, they were deeply affected. As you would see in this case, the open spaces that had a lot of meaning for the local communities were kind of destroyed. So one of the key things that we discovered was, and I want to bring forward this issue, what kind of heritage is of priority when a disaster or a trauma strikes? Is this the heritage which is monumental? Is the heritage which is more attractive for visitors or tourists around the world, which is more important? Or we have to think about heritage which is more closely connected to people for whom it is very important to have this heritage or save this heritage because it provides them a kind of psychological support. It gives them connection to where they are. And that was a big gap that we discovered in the case of Nepal earthquake, that the entire attention gets focused onto larger monuments, onto bigger sites, but very little is really thought about heritage which belongs to the communities. So this is just our team. Let's just try to move with some examples, which I think are going to be interesting for further discussion. When we went and saw these houses, they were badly damaged, and you can see nobody was living there. They could not live there, and they had all moved to temporary shelters. And when we went there, the only policy that the government had was that they wanted to pull down these houses because they were, of course, unsafe. And so they wanted to bring a bulldozer and just, consider the whole thing as rubble. And when we spoke to the people, people said, look, we are okay if the houses are demolished, but what is most important for us are these architectural fragments like these windows, because these are the ones which give us identity. So, even if you can save these windows, it will be a big help for us, because we really want them to be with us. Whenever we do reconstruction, we want these windows to be available because this will give us a kind of link to our ancestors. And at that time, there was so much because of chaos, these kind of architectural fragments which were carved in wood were being exported or smuggled out of the country. So again, nobody was paying attention to this, because only attention that was paid in the name of heritage was to those larger monuments and temples. And the other issue that we found at that time was that there are a lot of objects which belong to families who have lost their loved ones or whose property has been totally destroyed. For example, photographic albums or small items which are connected to their family or to their cultural practices. So these are all in the rubble. And how can we actually bring attention of those who are responding at that time to consider not throwing away everything, but at least recognizing that there is something very, very deeply valuable buried inside this rubble that have to be addressed. Now, this is where the whole challenge lies, that the official definition of heritage is one issue where we want to bring heritage in disaster risk management, but there is also an issue of more simpler heritage which is connected to people which is actually not even considered in disaster situations. The other thing, which is what I also wanted to tell, was uh, people really want to protect whatever heritage they have, even if there is no support given to them from outside. But sometimes, because there is no basic advice, they, in fact, for example, here there was a temple that people are themselves demolishing after the earthquake because it is maybe partly damaged, but they are demolishing it because they want to keep it in a safe location, because they don't want that the disaster management agencies come and demolish them and totally make something completely new. So they wanted to actually save all the pieces of this old temple. They demolished it themselves and they kept it in this storage area. Again, something which community did because they wanted to save what they think was their heritage, but because they didn't have the proper advice, they stored it in this area. But this was exposed to rain, and and in fact, when we went there, we found that it was actually getting deteriorated, all these wooden fragments. So again, where do we want to provide advice? What kind of advice do we want to provide? Who should be given the advice? All these are important questions that have to be always thought about. Even in terms of the technical interventions, when you think about shoring, what is the right kind of shoring which is required for these structures? Because everybody tries to do whatever they want, they can do. Sometimes they put in too much, sometimes they put in too little. But again, the question of what is the right kind of advice. The other thing which I also want to mention is the importance of other kind of stakeholders when such a disaster happens. It's not only heritage people who are in charge. And often we don't talk to the other side. We don't talk to civic defense agencies, whether they are from army, from police. We don't talk to municipality because maybe the heritage department just wants to think that they will be able to deal with any disaster situation. But again, it's really, really important that in disaster situation, we connect with all these other stakeholders. For example, here in the case of Nepal, when we went to after the earthquake, we found that the army was really, really eager to help. Of course, they had a lot of work to do. They had to clear the rubble, but nobody told them, or there was no coordination between them and the heritage organization to give them some advice on how they can deal with, or at least identify which of the rubble is really of heritage importance. And equally important are the other kind of stakeholders, which are the community members. And again, when we went there, we found that a lot of community members, here you can see a group of women, are doing voluntary service to clear the rubble, but all on their own, because officially they are not recognized as partners for heritage response and recovery. And that is something which again needs a lot of discussion, how there could be a more connection between heritage agencies, who are of course having a mandate to take care of heritage, but all the other actors and stakeholders who are going to be very important in any disaster or trauma situation. So training them, giving them basic advice on how to handle these kind of fragments is really, really key. The other issue we also again looked at, this is a museum which was kind of damaged, and it was not possible to go inside, but there were very important objects inside. But again, you need a kind of coordination between because what they were looking for were a kind of good documentation which can tell them where the important objects are in the museum, so that they can prioritize, they can find a way of saving these objects. But because the inventories were actually one of the important inventory sources were buried in the rubble, so it was very hard to find the actual inventory. And again, because there was no coordination between the army and the museum agency, it was very hard to coordinate the action. So here you can see that a lot of effort was done to rescue this one of the important objects which belong to the royal family. So again, we need to kind of have a bit of prioritization in advance. We need to be sure that the documentation is easily available, accessible to not just the heritage agencies, but in disaster situations, other actors will also need the access to them so that a joint strategy can be devised. And I think I will not go longer, but I would like to mention that it is so important to create a workflow, a kind of procedure by which you are going to do series of actions in a disaster situation, starting from identifying, recording, moving, storing, giving the security to whatever is there. So because in a chaotic situation, maybe it might be lost. So a kind of order, a kind of procedure or workflow is very much required. And lastly, but most importantly, we also need to create a team of local emergency responders, heritage professionals who can work together with the disaster responders to do all the actions that are required in a disaster situation. So in this case, you have all this kind of pieces of heritage which have been put together in an open area, but they are all in a very they have been just saved, but many of them might be useful in the later recovery process because you can put them back together and reuse them, as was done by a very, I would say, a local NGO, Kathmandu Valley Preservation Trust, where they use actually the local craftsmen to put these windows together for the recovery work. And this requires a whole set of capacities, skills on how to really deal with collapsed structures, the various architectural fragments, how to sort them out, how to make sure that some of them can be reused, while some of them may have to move to the museum. So there are all crucial decisions that have to be made. And I want to conclude by emphasizing the importance of local community volunteers, because no matter how much you put in your technical expertise, how much you are able to bring a kind of advice as expert, eventually the kind of work you need to do is so massive that you really require a lot of effort by the young, especially the young community members, to help because they want to save. So you need to engage with them. It cannot be done as a top-down or a very expert-oriented strategy. So I will just conclude with this, and I hope there are points that we can then discuss later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rohit. And I was pleased to hear that points that you stressed are very much in line with the rights-based approaches principles that should be accommodated also to all the rescue activities. But I'm now giving the floor to Amra Hadzimuhamedovic from Bosnia for the case study from Bosnia.
Oh, I'm muted. Hello, everyone, once again. It's a great pleasure to be with you today, and thank you for inviting me. There are two reasons that I will make digression even before starting my presentation, which will consume an extra minute of time allotted to me. Excuse me for that. The first digression is because of the design of the poster for today's webinar, where Old Bridge in Mostar in Bosnia is used as a symbol of the trauma and cultural heritage nexus. To the universal symbolism of the bridge destruction, I add the quote by Slavenka Drakulic, often quoted, which is a universally applicable explanation of the nexus. The bridge, in all its beauty and grace, was built to outlive us. It was an attempt to grasp eternity, because it was the product of both individual creativity and collective experience. It transcended our individual destiny. A dead woman is one of us, but the bridge, or a monument, I can say, is all of us forever. The second, or the other digression, on the night between August 25 and 26, 29 years ago, Bosnian National Library was burned. Some 3 million books and countless artifacts were destroyed together with the building. Today is a day of remembrance of the biggest single book burning in the history. So the organization of this webinar has a symbolic meaning for us in Bosnia as well. My presentation, Mosque First, coming to terms with the legacy of abuse in Bosnia through heritage restoration, is a short excerpt from a chapter with the same title, published in a book, Architecture of Coexistence, edited by Azrak Shamia and published by Berlin-based Architangle. The reconstruction of mosques in those areas of Bosnia where crimes of genocide and ethnic cleansing were carried out is a significant resource both for restorative justice and for restoring trust between war-divided groups and individuals. For victims, reconstructing the mosque in their place of return was considered a central symbol of such a reclaimed home, a testament to their place in the world and their right to public expression of identity. My research in eastern and southern Bosnia, which resulted in the chapter of the book, indicates that even for those who are not themselves Muslims, reconstructing damaged mosques can be a meaningful part of the process of overcoming insecurity, desecration, and dispossession. They too have been deprived of their homescape by the ethnic cleansing of others, although they didn't have to leave the place of their origin. Their loss is contained in two key physical negative aspects of their life landscape: emptiness and absence. Both emptiness and absence tend to destroy what Bosnians call komšiluk, or neighborhood as community, a major factor in Bosnian interreligious cultural landscapes. The demand that mosques be reconstructed was thus conceived as a first step in coming to terms with the legacy of ethnic cleansing. Filling the emptiness that appeared when the mosques were destroyed with familiar forms, content, uses, and customs offers the hope of a return to stability which is sorely needed by all those whose homescape has been stripped away in one way or another. Neither return nor the loss of one's homescape, however, is a simple matter. It can be symbolic, physical, formal, and existential. Existential return is not just a method of establishing stability in the world for people forced from their homes, of which they have intimate memories and abiding images, but also for those who were children or perhaps even unborn at the time they were deprived of their rights to a home, and who have therefore built up their own pictures of that lost homescape out of the stories and the testimony of the community they belong to. After the destruction, the remnants of the Bosnian mosques were transported away to be thrown into the beds of rivers and lakes and rubbish dumps, or in some cases buried in the ground alongside the bodies of murdered Muslims. In summer of 2004, parts of the 16th century Al-Ajah Mosque in Foča were found during the excavation of a human mass grave. The mosque was dynamited on 2nd August 1992, St. Elijah's Day, a festival celebrated by both Bosnian Muslims and Orthodox Christians in parallel. The destroyers followed the pattern of a destruction liturgy that exploited the sacred calendar and components of the biblical rituals of consecration by blood to achieve purification not only of the land, but of all forms of collective memory after the Muslim population had all been killed or expelled. The Elijah Mosque is just one of more than 1,000 Bosnian mosques destroyed that summer. Its high symbolic value in Bosnian memoryscapes is reflected in narratives and in the transmission of personal experiences. Each of these narratives is a myth-forming combination of reality and imagination. This is not least because the reality was so intense, unimaginable, and unbearable that it has made the surreal seem equally possible. Those who survived the massacres in Foča continued to repeat a story that the call for prayer, adhan, would echo from the vacant site of destroyed Elijah Mosque. Most of my interlocutors from Foča have repeated the story in one way or another. A Bosnian Orthodox Christian woman from Foča heard the adhan coming from the site of the Elijah Mosque on 3 successive evenings, starting on August 2nd, 1992, the day of its destruction, when town was ethnically cleansed. She lived close to the site and through her confusion and horror, noticed that her neighbors were also behaving as though they too had heard it. The legend and the burial method make clear the symbolic halo of the mosque in Bosnian cognitive maps and how it extends beyond the merely physical. The reconstruction of destroyed mosques in Bosnia begins with the gathering up of their remains or fragments. When the Croat military forces destroyed 4 mosques in the center of Stolac, a small historic town in the south of Bosnia, in August 1993, after all its Muslims had been expelled or confined to concentration camps, Emir managed to save himself by fleeing. He walked for 4 days over the hills, covering the more than 150 kilometers between the various armies, en route to Sarajevo, which was then under siege. In his backpack, he was carrying a stone from destroyed Čaršijska Mosque from 1519 in Stolac and bore his witness to the suffering of the people and the destruction of the mosques as inseparable phenomena. It would only be in August 2001, 8 years after its destruction, that systematic collection of the remains of the Čaršija Mosque actually became possible. Emir was one of those who dug it out, stone by stone, from the earth, pulled it from the riverbed and from the garbage dumps. The area of the Čaršija Mosque in the deserted town, to which return was not allowed, became an area for a divided and scattered people together and for the collection of discarded fragments. Those fragments were then, without fixing or hiding the traces of the violence committed against their original workmanship, built into the reconstructed mosque. This was a work of cultural memory in which the scars of destruction and suffering were turned into additional features bearing symbolic and historic value. After the demolishers had transported its remnants from the site of Elijah Mosque and dumped them in 2 locations, one part buried in the earth with the bodies of murdered Muslims, the other dumped in the river alongside, it would be children, Orthodox Christian children, who began the process of gathering up the remains. According to Milidrag, we, as children, used to gather up stones from Čehotina River. We kept them, the fragments, in a burnt-out house. Between this childish attempt to save at least the fragments of memory and a thorough official program of excavation, documentation, and storing of the stones of the Al-Hajjah, some 13 years would pass. The process of reestablishing the mosque took 27 years, from destruction to its reconstruction. Samira escaped Focha 27 years ago. I don't go there. The smell of blood hangs in the air. Asked whether she will go once the Al-Hajjah mosque has been fully restored, she says, I would like to. There is something that draws me still. The reconstruction of the mosque surely has no power to fill the emptiness and absences in Milidrag's and Samira's homescape. But on the day that the mosque was reopened, they both could find a common ground to return to, even if only in virtual fashion. I would like to thank you for the attention, and I'm ready for discussion.
Thank you, Amra, for this very touching presentation. And it's good to admit that time does not heal a lot of things, because me from Estonia, we witnessed similar almost genocidal events almost 80 years ago, and the memory is still there, a painful memory. So it's a very terrible situation. But before going to discussion, I would like to give floor also to Samir Abdullah for his intervention. Please, Samir.
Yes, thank you for inviting me. You don't see me, how come? Do you hear me? But you don't see me.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, we can see your slide.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry for that. So I'm going to talk about Malula, which is a small village near Damascus. Well, first of all, Syria, you see it here on the map. And then a map of Syria and the location of Malula in red in a mountain region. It is rather isolated, and the community also was isolated. It has a population of about 2,000 people in winter and 5,000 in summer. A lot of people come back there because the climate is better in the summer. It was placed on the World Heritage List in 1999, and perhaps it will be presented to the World Heritage List. The village is located at the end of a fertile canyon, and it is surrounded by high mountains, high cliffs. And the contrast between the cliffs and the village is striking. Cave dwellings were used in the past in prehistory and antiquity in the cliffs, and the place was marked by the memory of a saint called Saint Taclau, who was a disciple of Saint Paul in the early ages of Christianity. The village had a special architecture, and a lot of people in the past used to go there for the climate and for the landscape and the architecture. This is the view of this village now. Unfortunately, some buildings are now built with concrete. This village has also a particularity. It is the language spoken by the people. They speak Aramean, and Aramean was the language of Christ. Christ didn't speak Latin, didn't speak Hebraic, he spoke Aramaic. This village has a large Christian community, and this community has several denominations. Anyway, the surrounding cliffs act like a theater scene. For religious reminding. In 2013, an extremist rebel group took over the village, kidnapped the nuns. Some people were killed, and most of the population flew away. Inside the churches, some acts of vandalism were made. This is not war, it's vandalism. And after several battles, the government army took over finally again the village in 2014. However, almost the whole population had flown away to Damascus and were cautious to come back. They were frightened. So the challenge was to make the population come back to the village, and moreover, the Christian population in Syria decreased, which is not very important. It was some 15% before the event, has dwindled a lot during the conflict, perhaps by 2/3. This is a view of the village from the top of the cliff. Those, you see the roofs. After the battle, many houses were destroyed. So a survey was undertaken by School of Architecture, by the Directorate General of Antiquities. And you see here in yellow the religious buildings, in gray the houses, and in red, according to the state of conservation of those houses. And a general plan was launched. Yes. So first thing, the religious buildings were taken into account. They were restored. You saw before the images, before and after outside. This is before and after from inside. Some sanctuary also were restored here in a cave. In the monasteries, the convent also were restored. And the churches were reopened, and even a new decoration with icons were provided. Now about the population, there was help by the United Nations Development Program to clear the streets and to begin restoring some buildings. The municipality restored the infrastructure, electricity, water, etc. And destroyed houses started to be restored as they were before. You see another house here with traditional materials, stone, wood, etc. This is a floor being restored with traditional materials. In fact, there is a government help for people who restore their houses with traditional techniques. And there is also an advisory service by the Direction of Antiquities to the inhabitants. They get the help if they use traditional buildings, but there is some flexibility for the new arrangement if they remain in the spirit, in the traditional spirit as well. However, when a building is totally destroyed, like here, an architect, a specialized architect in restoration, is asked. So, out of about 200 houses, 80 rehabilitation permits were given, and 5 reconstruction permits, which means the whole building has to be reconstructed, were given. The government incentives were 50% for the churches, 30% for individual houses. So it's sort of joint venture. Some facilities had to be provided, like kindergarten, primary and secondary school, library. Foreign non-governmental organizations also participate. And now about 30 to 50% of the original population has returned. At least that was when I made a visit 2 years ago. foreign organizations sometimes bring volunteers to work with inhabitants. Others provide funds, and there is something very important beside the churches, besides the houses, you have the job opportunities, and this is why training is also provided in traditional craft, but also in newer one for men and women. It could be carpentry, it could be weaving. What was important was to bring people back, to let them live, to keep their tradition, and also to have job opportunities, employment. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Samir, for your presentation. And as you have such a long and diverse experience, I would like to address you. The first question that we have in the chat is that do you think that there are different ways to face trauma for communities, whether it is linked to a natural hazard or to a war, or the process involving heritage? Are they similar or they are different?
Well, I would say, first of all, what happens after the cause, after the reason why there is a trauma. Is the population still there or not? If the population is there, it is easier to consult the population and to work with the population and to try to make the population participate in reconstruction and recovery. The problem is different and more arduous, more difficult when the population has flown away. In this case, the stake is the challenge is to bring back the population. First of all, in having housing, having facilities, basic facilities, even water, electricity, things like that, in having a way of finding their own roots, even if those roots are religious. And after that, they need to reconstruct themselves, to have ways of gaining money, having jobs, activities. And after that, you have the social reconstruction also of people. So the recovery could be a whole process, but that process may take different aspects according to the ground zero, if I may say.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Well, when you were giving your presentation, I was also thinking of this Afghanistan case, that one of the reasons why international heritage community is so worried is because there has been a lot of international aid in recovering the monuments that have been destroyed 20 years ago. And now we are facing the fact that the people who were involved in this recovery process, they are afraid of their fate in the new situation. Yeah, but that
Yes.
that shouldn't stop us. Yeah.
Yes, of course. We should always take the population into account to try to bring it back if it has gone away, and to have it participate in decisions and in needed works.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. I have to put my glasses on. There are no more questions in the chat. But what I was also reflecting on all of the three presentations.
Sorry,
Yes.
Rita. There are
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah, please. Yeah, please.
There are questions. We have received several questions from Virginia.
Yes.
Yeah. The questions from Virginia was the end of her presentation. And we asked our assistants to write them down.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. But I think it's we can very well go from these questions. Okay. But also from your presentation, Amra, I was thinking further on that that you had a very, very good point of the eternal what we consider eternal nature of monuments, that they are built to last, and affecting them is a trauma in itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That, in fact, was a point by Slavenka Drakulic that has been so frequently quoted by the people dealing with heritage and post-trauma recovery. So she, in fact, stressed that monuments are built, historic monuments are built to outlive us. So they represent us from ever, forever, all of us, not one of us. So that's the point of, whenever we discuss, why to conserve heritage when human lives are lost, when people are crippled, when they are pushed out from their homes, and why do monuments matter? And Slavenka Drakulic summarizes that in her short article that is titled Falling Down Elegy for Old Bridge in Mostar, like a week after it was destroyed. However, I would like, if you allow me, just to continue what Samir said concerning the difference between the trauma that was triggered by hazards, either natural hazards or human-induced hazards. In fact, usually after the conflict, it's not only the heritage that is destroyed, it's not only the community that is affected through material destruction, through this, by this catastrophe, the communities are divided and destroyed. And there is this persistent conflict after armed conflict stops. So the role of heritage becomes even more important because there is a possibility to harness it for reconciliation dwelling in the universal values of heritage, the power of heritage to link people through its values, presenting it not as a reflection of the conflicting identity, but something that rebinds people. So that's why it's, beside the fact that restoration of cultural heritage, especially homes and the buildings of the central or the foci point in the settlements are demanded, that restoration, because they are kept as something that is unchangeable in their memories. They bring them security to the people that are scattered by disaster. Beside that, the restoration of the cultural heritage in post-armed conflict situation can have this power to settle the conflict, to act as a peace resolution and transitional justice tool. Mm-hmm. And that's, in fact, something that we have to think about. Of course, always placing any activity in all the contexts, not only the historic context, not only the spatial context, but different kind of contexts. It's extremely important to develop the methods of harnessing heritage restoration for the peace settlement and sustainable peace settlement. What I have learned when working on this people-centered approach in post-trauma recovery is that we heritage people, conservation architects and conservation experts have to be ready to learn from the people, to listen to them and their needs. And to do that, we have to learn some anthropological methodology. Ethnographic sort of research, working with people, exchanging our expert knowledge with the folk knowledge and with the needs of people is a key of this participatory restoration after trauma that brings the restoration into the field of the processes that are peace establishing processes.
Yes, thank you, Amra. That is actually, these are very good words to conclude, as I have been noticed that we have to stop now the discussion. But this is I absolutely agree with your position, and I think that rights-based approaches, which is the organizer of this seminar, anyway, that our idea is to find out the vulnerable parties, the vulnerable stakeholders, and sought to act as a mediator between the conflicting parties to find the peace. So heritage has a lot to do in peacemaking. But thank you very much. I will give now word to Alicia. And thank you, Rohit, Amra, and Samir, for your wonderful presentations. And there's a lot to keep thinking of.
Thank you, Ri. Buenas tardes, muchas gracias a todo el mundo por esta intervención. Thank you so much, the speaker and the participant of the webinar for us on behalf of the coordinator of the webinar series. Are very happy with this new webinar, and I think we have to congratulate Lord and the rest of the members of emerging professionals for this interesting and important webinar. Of course, we have to continue, and we have a little time. I would like to, for the future, to have more time for debate, but it's impossible, and consequently, I have to close quickly and to introduce the next webinar that will be in September, the 30th of September, about Africa and the right to heritage. And the following will be always the last Thursday of the month, will be about inspirational document and case studies for future policies. And in November, living heritage and climate change, that is very interesting topic too. And finally, in December, the member of the working group, especially the coordinator of the initiative, we will try to make a summarize of the year concerning this webinar. Of course, it is very important for this, especially for this last webinar, to have your opinion, not only during the chat or in the question of a specific content, even about the style of the webinar and the proposal of topic for the next year to continue with the initiative. And please, there was share the link of our evaluation pool. We will be very grateful if you finally can answer and help us to improve our initiative. And nothing else. I hope to see you the next webinar in September. Have a good end of the summer for part of us, and for the other part of us, end of the winter. I don't know. Bye bye, and see you soon. Bye.